What's up guys, Austin from Billetworkz here. Today I'm going to show you how to install our new short shifter for the Veloster N. Fairly simple install with a huge improvement over the stock shifter. So let's get into it. Now that I'm inside the car, I'm going to show you guys how to install the short shifter. First things first, we're going to remove the shift knob. So the stock shift knob for the Veloster N or Elantra N just pops off. I like to put the car in fourth, so when I pull at it, I'm kind of pulling away from my face. So I'm going to go ahead and grab this. I like to twist it a little bit and pull at the same time, so it's going to take a little bit of force and it'll pop right off. Next step is removing the shift boot. I'll put the car back in neutral and just grab the boot itself and lift up. It'll pop out. Slide that off. Then I'm going to remove this center console trim piece here. Lift up the armrest. I'm going to get like my plastic trim tool here. I'm going to get behind in this seam. So as you can see here, the clips are pointing down, so you want to actually pull up in all directions. This one's actually facing on forward, so it'll take a little bit of manipulating, but it'll come right off. Next, I'm going to remove this piece here. I just have a 90-degree pick. And sometimes that just flies right off, but that works. A couple more trim pieces to remove. I'm going to use my pick again. There's a little pocket that you can get the pick under. There's two clips here, just two smaller clips in the front, but I'll just pop right up. While we're in here, I'm going to remove this plug here. There's a tab on the underside of it that I depressed to pull it out. Next, I'm going to remove the center console piece here. I'm going to start in the back. I'm going to get my fingers inside where the e-brake handle comes out. I'm going to try and grab here. And just like that other piece, all the tabs are facing down, so you want to try and pull straight up. So before I keep moving on the install, I'm going to measure the throw of the stock shifter. I'm going to go from third gear to fourth gear. So I'll start in third, get my tape measure. I'm going to measure off a spot on the dash. Starts out in third at about 7 inches. In fourth, we're at about 10 3/8. So that's about a 3 3/8 inch of throw. Next, we're going to remove these two Phillips head screws. Then we're going to remove these two 10mm nuts. That will allow for this metal bracket here to be removed. Now with that bracket out, it gives us a little bit more wiggle room to work with. Next, I need to disconnect the shifter cables. I'm going to remove this retaining clip here. Next, I need to disconnect the shifter cable attached to the bottom of the shifter rod. This is the one that moves forward when shifting in between gears. You see there's two metal prongs here. These actually need to be pried away from each other. So I'm going to get my hand in here, pry them apart with 2 fingers, and also push down on the shifter cable at the same time. You can see there it disconnects, and you can actually see You can actually see the metal tabs is what actually holds it up onto the shifter rod. Now I need to remove the shifter cables from the housing. What I'm going to do is I'm going to grab on the round section here and pull that back towards the back of the car on both of the cables. So you can kind of see here, I'm going to try and show you that unlocks it, and then you actually lift up. It allows it to come out of the housing. With that one out, you can see that cable's loose. This one's loose here as well. Now I'm going to remove the 4 bolts that hold the housing into place. These are 12mm bolts. There's 2 in the front, 2 in the back. So now I'm going to fish out the entire housing here. This might be a little tricky with the trim here, but we'll be able to get it out. So I'm going to make sure the cables are out of the way. Now that we have this unmounted from the car, I'm going to take it over the workbench. So now that I have the housing outside of the car, first I'm going to cut this lock washer, then I'm going to remove this roll pin that locks this cover into place. I'm going to use an angle grinder to cut this washer off. So as you can see, I have it clamped here in the vise. I'm going to take my angle grinder and just very carefully cut away at the washer. I'm just going to put a little notch in it so then we can pry it off. I'm going to take my punch and punch out this pin. So now this top cover is ready to come off. You'll see with that pin out, there's a little bit of movement here. I'm going to push this pin through, set that to the side, and then this whole cover will come off. I'm going to remove this side bracket. That'll just pop off. So now I need to remove the stock shifter from the housing, and to do that I'm going to take a few flathead screwdrivers and pry in at these tabs to unlock them so it comes out. You might want to grab a friend for this just because there's 4 tabs, and we're going to try using 4 different screwdrivers to hold those tabs unlocked so it'll pop out. So now that we actually have the shifter rod out of the housing, I'm going to remove the black bushing here. This will just pop off. Then I need to remove this white bushing as well. I recommend using a set of pliers, because I do not want to hit this with a hammer, so I don't want to break it. I'm just going to put my pliers on it and just kind of pop it off. Now we don't need this anymore. We're going to grab our Billetworkz Short Shifter, and we need to do a little bit of disassembly to be able to get this bushing on. Take my Allen wrench, pull out these 2 small button head screws, and I can pull the lockout out. Then I'm going to remove this socket head bolt here. And when I'm removing it, I'm going to put a little bit of upward pressure on it. When the bolt comes out, then the lockout will be able to slide down. Then you'll see a snap ring here. I'm going to remove this snap ring with my snap ring pliers. and the washer and spring can come off. And then the lower portion of the reverse lockout can come off. And we'll go ahead and slide on the factory bushing. Still looks to be plenty of grease here. You can apply some more grease if you want. I'm going to go ahead and stick with the factory grease. Snap that on. Go ahead and replace everything else. Now the lower portion of the lockout, you want this extrusion to face the same direction as the pivot here. Run our spring, our washer, put the snap ring back on. Make sure that's snapped into the groove. I'm going to slide up the lower portion of the lockout to where I can see through the slot. I'm going to insert the bolt back in there. Snug that up. Then the upper portion of the lockout you can slide on. Make sure that's nice and greased. I'm going to snug these up. Now these don't need to be very tight. I'm just putting a little bit of torque on them. I'm going to put the bushing on the R shifter. I like to just push straight down on a hard surface. That snap on there. And this is ready to go back in the housing. Snap that back into place. See, it's got some good movement. The grease in there helps. If you want to, you can add a little bit more grease. I normally just use white lithium grease. Now we can start assembling the rest of the components. Now before you reinstall this bracket, you want to make sure that this spring is still situated correctly. Sometimes it'll pop off like that. You just want to get that under tension. When you slide that on, this rubber bushing will also go in between the two tabs of the spring. I'm going to first snap it onto the shifter, and I'm going to get the spring located. I'll have to come back and make sure I get that good. I'm going to take this top cover piece, get that into place, then I can send this through. And there are two flats on this, so you want to make sure that they're oriented correctly. Now that I kind of have this together, you'll be able to see that this functions and articulates. Then I'm going to send this pin back through. You want that pin flush in there. Next I'm going to install the new lock washer here. You see this is just like the stock one. I place that over top. I'll take a 13mm socket. You can use something similar size. Put that on the washer. Put a little bit of pressure on it so it kind of starts. I'm going to take my hammer and just give it a nice couple taps. Make sure this pin is pushed the whole way through. You can see it moved a little bit. So when I'm also hammering this, I'm also pushing forward on this pin. Yep, that's nice and snug. And now it's ready to go back in the car. Now before we install the shifter housing back into the car, if you're installing our solid shifter bushings, you want to make sure you remove them from the factory housing. And to do that, you're going to push out the metal pieces of the bushing here. It'll just come out, and then you'll be able to pry out the orange bushings. And of course you want to do that all four. It'd probably be easier to do it on the workbench, but I'm not doing it for this install just because we don't have them in production yet, but we do recommend the solid bushings. So now I'm going to reinstall the housing and the shifter, and we're just going to put everything back together the same way we took it apart. So now I need to remove the boot from the lockout. I'm going to do that by prying in with a screwdriver here and opening up these tabs. And the black piece will come apart. And you can pull the lockout out. This little retainer is just glued. So now in order for the boot to fit over top of our lockout, I just need to cut the very top threads on both sides. I'm going to use a very small cutters here. I'm just going to work at both sides. I'm just going to cut down the equal amount. Just working kind of slow at it because I don't want to open it up too much. So what I'm going to want to do is, once I have this cut back a decent amount, you can see about how much I have it cut. I'm going to slide the boot down over the lockout when it's flipped inside out like this. So I'm going to slide this down over this lip. And once I have it over the lip, I'm going to take my zip tie. Then when I flip the boot back down, there'll be a nice clean look there. And of course I can pop the boot back into place. Now that we're just about done with the install, last step is installing the shift knob. But before I do that, I'm going to take some measurements so we can compare it to stock. I'm going to measure off the dash again, put the car in third. Looks to be about 7 1/8 to fourth gear, or about 9 3/4. So that's about 2 5/8 of throw. So now last step is installing the shift knob. Of course I recommend a Billetworkz shift knob. Here's our performance blue Tall Teardrop with a Korean shift pattern and a Veloster N logo. With our short shifters, you don't have to use a Billetworkz shift knob though. It's a 12 by 1.25 millimeter thread, so you can go with a shift knob from any other company. You just want to make sure it has proper reverse lockout clearance so the lockout functions properly. But in order to install the Billetworkz shift knob, I'm going to take our jam nut, I'm going to thread that the whole way down, take our insert, thread that down. I'm going to take a 17 millimeter and a 19 millimeter wrench to lock the two together. I'm going to thread on the shift knob. Now chances are the engraving is going to be crooked, which this one is actually perfect. But if your engraving is crooked, all you have to do is unthread the shift knob. Then you'll loosen up the insert and jam nut, spin it however much degrees the engraving was off. So if the engraving was off 90 degrees, you just spin the insert 90 degrees, lock the two together again, and then spin the shift knob back on. Now the reason I lock these two together first is if you don't, the insert will get stuck in the shift knob, and it's pretty tricky to get it out. But as long as you have these two tight together, when you thread the shift knob on, it won't get stuck. I'm going to thread this back on. That's nice and straight. So now I'm finished with the install. As you can see, shifts are great, nice and crisp. Here again we have our performance blue Tall Teardrop. You can go with any shape, any color, any engraving, especially with our short shifters. You can choose your lockout color. If you have any questions, you can check out our website or you can send us an email. We'll see you next time.